Hello, hello.
Hey Matt, how's living?
Good. I'm uh I'm super excited to be together today, and certainly super excited to welcome you back from Can ITCon. When did you get back?
I got back yesterday afternoon, so well rested, ready to rock.
Well caffeinated.
I'm not actually. I'm on decaf lately, but I'm ready to go.
There you go. There you go. I see name in the attendee list that you know well, Tom Sopwith.
Oh yeah, hey Tom.
Oh, raise his hand. There you go. So we'll get started here in a second. Um, but again, always, I said this in my post this morning, highlighting the content today. That again, super excited every time we get the chance to talk. Todd, like I said, if I could go back in time and reintroduce myself to you when I was an MSP operator, I would take that opportunity 11 out of 10 times because every time we get the chance to talk, I come away with the wheels turning.
Well, I mean, maybe that was a long time ago, and I'm a constant student of the industry, so I've always been learning. Maybe I didn't know as much back then, but
Yeah, we'll see. Excited to dig into today's topic as well. Certainly through the lens of those learnings and through the lens of what's top of mind that I know for a lot of operators and a lot of people in the space, which is how do I find leverage within my operation? How do I maximize the capacity built in or inherent in my service team and in my projects or organization? I know for a lot of providers, they're one and the same, right? I think we talked a little bit last time, building up that service pyramid. As you look into project management, a lot of people are using their tier two, their tier three resources as a shared pool of resource. Um, Specializes maybe a little bit down the way as they grow, but looking forward to digging in there as well.
yeah, awesome.
All right, I'll go ahead and get we have a very short deck, light deck for folks today. While I'm doing that, do you want to take a couple minutes to introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, so people who don't know me, I'm Todd Kane. I run a company called Evolved Management and focusing on helping MSPs to be more profitable with less stress and just leveraging off the sort of a lot of experiences that I have in the VAR project and MSP world. Kind of collected all these experiences over 20 plus years coming from the technical side of the house and then moving to the operations side. And really kind of fallen in love with being an operator, really figuring out efficiencies and better ways to do things, and systems and tools and frameworks that can be applied to help people out to make them more productive and get more done, but not sort of burn off the wheels as you're growing, basically.
I love it. I love it. And for those who haven't found you already, your site is evolvedmgmt.com. Is that right?
Yep. Yep. You can go to involved with a D, mgmt.com, or itisabusiness.com is sometimes an easier one to spell.
There you go. Love it. And it is. I think that's a great segue, right? For those of you who don't know me, I'm Matt Lynn. I'm the co-founder and chief operating officer at Thread. And so my background is also in MSP operations. In a former life, I spent 10 years with an MSP out of New York by the name of RFA, Richard Fleischman Associates. Started compliance, technical documentation side of things, working with hedge funds to document their environment, make sure that they were investor ready and that they were backed up the way that they were supposed to be, that they were replicated the way that they were supposed to be. So definitely jumped in the deep end there, but grew up through account management into operations, ultimately became chief of staff, and along the path ran the PSA administration team, procurement, marketing, everything that wasn't too technical. But really excited about the conversation today. Here's a brief agenda. We'll get into why you should care about this conversation, right? Always think starting with why. Thank you, Simon Sinek, is really important. Because again, very much top of mind for me and us as we think about how do we help the industry continue to evolve and to grow and scale, right? When we think about a very human resource intensive field with a lot of technology behind it, how do we leverage that technology to scale without scaling the team? Something that we think about a lot. And then we talked last time quite a bit about the operational maturity journey. Really interested to learn about the second tier, which is project management. How do we think about leverage through that lens, and what efficiencies, opportunities does that gain us on that side of the house? I know it's very much top of mind for you following your talk at Can ITCon.
Yeah,
And then after that, we'll get into AI and how it can be used to create more leverage.
perfect.
Let's do it. So there's a lot of content here. I'm curious to get your take a little bit on if this is still true, or if as the industry is evolving, if we should think about it through a different lens.
What year is this from the service leadership? Do you recall?
Last year, yeah.
Okay. So interestingly, this is like service leadership is one of the things that I called out in that talk that I was doing as well. Because I think one of the important components of this is before we sort of get to the specifics of what's being called out here is one of the most damning statistics from service leadership historically and has been true for years and years is a full 25%, a full quartile, a bottom quartile of the industry is either break even or losing money. And it's a really disheartening thing to understand that not only are people not growing their business, but they're slowly going out of business. And that's a full 25% of the industry, which is really shocking. But the one point that I've really been kind of banging on about, and this is a big component of what I was trying to drive home in my talk this year, that I did at Can ITCon as well, is that the other statistic that Peter Kajawa from Service Leadership noted is that the companies, the MSPs, are generally pretty good at operations and service, and if they're just focus on their MSA clients and the support work that they do, they have decent profitability. But the industry is so bad at project management, it cannibalizes all other profits, right? So projects are eating all of the profits from the rest of the organization. And the part that really bothers me about this is I don't feel like people really recognize how much of a problem this is, right? Because one of my sort of favorite quotes from an early client that I had is, Todd, honestly, projects are there for a means to an end in order to make sure the client re-signs their MSA. And he said this totally in earnest to me, like he really believed that, right? And there is a massive opportunity to increase your operational efficiency and your margin in your organization if you get projects right. So I think that to me is sort of the biggest component of this is understanding that the sort of the statistics are out there, understanding your margins, understanding your efficiency ratios. Those things are massively important because there's such a dramatic difference that you see here, right? Like the services margin on the bottom quartile at 40%, I would say is actually pretty good. I've seen best in class numbers as high as 70%. So I don't think that that's common. It's definitely not the average that you would see at 50%, but 50% is generally what I tell people to shoot for as a profitability number. So again, like if you don't know what your gross margin on services is, you should definitely take a look at that and understand it. And then secondarily, a lot of organizations know what their profitability is on services, but they don't know what their profitability is on projects because it's not broken out, right? So understand working with your bookkeeper and your accountant to break out your general ledger so that you can itemize your departments differently, so you can measure these things independently, I think is really, really important, right? But this is why I think, in my opinion, I really like benchmarks because it tells you what's possible. But it's also important to understand like where you're coming from, right? Because if you're really struggling, you're doing like 25 or 30% gross margin on services, like your next year's target shouldn't be 50 or 60. You want to make this an incremental gain. You're looking for sort of those efficiency gains and how you can eke those out, just sort of 2%, 5%, 10%, as much as you can kind of pick up. And that's really, I think, the core of what we're talking about here is where can we find those efficiencies? Because if you listen to your service manager, they're just going to say, we need more bodies. If you want us to do more work, we need more people. And that is not always true. It's sometimes true, like maybe the staff is overworked, but you need to be able to demonstrate that people are totally tapped out and really stressed and drowning under that work. But that's not always the case, and you need to be able to understand that with being able to measure these things and see it in the data.
Yeah, I think that's a great encapsulation of what we're planning to dig into today. Is inherent and underneath all of this is that we're dealing with finite capacity and potentially infinite demand. And so how do we unlock that capacity to make sure that people are A, efficient, but B, they're not being weighted down by a bunch of work that could or should be automated so that they can focus on doing the work that is important and that needs to get done by a person. And so We'll circle back to that a little bit later on in the deck. I am curious to double click into something that you mentioned which was folks are thinking about project work as a means to getting recurring revenue is what it sounds like to me, based on that comment that you made a little bit earlier on. For me, we saw that too in the MSP, and I think that only works when you're on the higher end of the kind of best in class profitability range from a margin perspective, right? Because if you're taking a massive hit on projects, the payback period on that from the margin that you're getting from recurring revenue could be quite long if it's not significantly elevated.
Yeah. And it's a tricky thing too, right? Because like I certainly don't suggest people include projects in your MSA, right? I think it's a very, very dangerous thing. There are certain companies that actually get buy-in doing this, but I don't think it's a good practice in general. And then, there are certain ways that this sort of shows up in certain places. So like how much standardization do you do in onboarding and whether or not that's included as a part of the MSA or paid for as a part of a project. Those things get a little more slippery because there are potentially a lot of returns that you can get from standardizing, taking a little extra time to standardize an environment very, very heavily up front. And that can help to drive a lot of those efficiency measures because standardization is the strongest lever that you can pull in an MSP, right? But understanding like what is the ROI if I'm going to just eat the cost on this and not have the client pay for it, not because you are uncomfortable or don't have sort of the confidence to be able to sell the value of that project, right? But because there's actually value in it to yourself and you're okay to do that from an onboarding perspective, right?
Yeah, and couldn't agree with you more in terms of not including projects in your MSA. Big risk. And I think, we have an MSP now as Thread. We want to make sure that we're eating our own dog food and that we're working with partners who are using our product. So we're both delivering service via the product, but also consuming service via the product. And in vetting through providers, we want to make sure that we actually find somebody who didn't scope that in because it ends up being a uncomfortable conversation down the way. And I think, having been on the other side, you see what that does to profitability. I do want to move on to the next slide here, but I think, as we think through capacity and as we think through expanding capacity on the lowest level of the service pyramid, which is service, I think it's important to, quickly talk about why it matters and how the human component drives a lot of that overhead, right? It's a shared resource pool. Certainly, if you have an all-you-can-eat type structure, whereby you have a service desk or pods dedicated to these customers, oftentimes it's the biggest piece of the pie, right? As it relates to what's driving costs, and then on top of cost, your margin.
Yeah, like I mean, for any business, staff and facility, right? Like your office cost and your people cost generally are tend to be the largest cost for any organization. Post COVID, maybe office costs are less because hybrid work is sort of minimizing the size of a lot of offices and the real estate that you need to operate an MSP in a lot of cases can be purely virtual, right? Like I know a lot of organizations, one in particular, they're like 50 staff and not like they're not only are they're spread around the world, but there's no two employees that are even in the same state, let alone the same city, right? So it's a different world now. But I think, again, it's really important to understand like where those costs come from, and this is important thing to understand because there is a limited capacity, and if you're sharing resources between service and projects, like that's just a natural position of the MSP. It's not until you're, at least kind of 20 people, maybe 25 people, where having a dedicated project resource actually makes sense. So the borrowing between the two different groups is a high point of friction in most organizations because someone's trying to do a project, they're working at their desk, kind of plugging away at this. Meanwhile, Teams is lighting up with DMs of people saying, "Hey, you got a minute? Can you help me with this? What about this client?" And the techs are bad at saying no. So they inevitably sort of ditch the project work because, it's what I describe as the tyranny of now, right? Like this is important but not urgent, and everything that's showing up in my DMs seems urgent even if it's not, right? So this creates a lot of sort of false efficiencies and friction between people trying to get the projects done and trying to also support the service part of the organization. And this is why a lot of MSP projects start to slide, right? Like part of the reason that we don't make a lot of money at these is we tend to blow out the budget and it takes way too long, right? So that those things I think are a natural consequence of the business model, especially for smaller organizations. And this is just the way it has to work out, unfortunately.
So you made an interesting point, a compelling point about the breakpoint size-wise as relates to headcount for when you specialize to bring in a project manager. I have another something kicking around the back of my mind as relates to what you're seeing in terms of number of users or endpoints supported by the team on that journey, right? As we're progressing through the maturity curve, does that typically increase as well, or should that be the goal?
It should be for sure. So the numbers you typically see are between 150 to 200 endpoints per tech. That I would say is sort of average. It's just where people tend to land without a lot of effort towards it. People that work really diligently around maximizing efficiency and minimizing sort of support costs, they can see upwards of 400 to 500 endpoints per user per tech. And then, enterprise organizations where everything is highly standardized and really, really dialed in, you as high as 1,000, but that's not really typical in an MSP environment because we also don't dictate the environments to our clients. We can make a lot of suggestions and prescriptions, but we don't actually operate the budget, so we can't really kind of itemize detail and dial in a lot of those environments. So I would say you want to shoot for 200, 250 as sort of a stretch point, but very possible. And then once you get really good at it, then probably you can start to crack it up to maybe 300, 400 if you're really good at it is probably a good measure.
Yeah, I think that's what we've been seeing as well, right? So, um, again, two big levers of profitability there, right? Is adding capacity to the team so they can focus on work that matters and delivering more higher quality service. And by extension, through that, being able to support more endpoints, more users, thereby like increasing the scope and the impact of the team. If I were to put a pin in that, but I think so. We talked about two things, right? When do you scale the team? When do you specialize the team? Do either come first? Like, would you recommend getting to that point of satiety, let's call it, or saturation, like the 150, 200, 250 endpoint count, and then specializing through a project manager, or would you put a project manager in before scaling on that side?
Well, I mean, if you go to the next slide, maybe this will kind of help sort of walk through this as well, right? So we've kind of been talking about this what my service pyramid, right? So base of the service pyramid is service, because without service operating correctly, the client won't listen to you about anything else that you have to say. And then once you get service dialed in, you can start to work on projects, because it's the next area of inefficiency and drag on the organization that you want to start to dial in. After you get projects working, then you'll have more capacity and comfort to be able to add additional projects. So what stacks on top of projects is business development, right? Or sorry, account management. Because then you can go to your accounts and start talking to them about the things that they could and they should be doing, right? It's sort of these technically it's account management in the industry. We tend to call this VCIO. Don't get me started about the blend between these things and how we sort of bastardize the term. But if you get to this point, you'll be a lot more comfortable to fill the funnel with additional projects, because now you can expect that they operate well. And then once you get your AM funnel working, then you're feeding the projects, and then you can take these things and start to maximize BD by winning new clients, getting new logos. So that's sort of how this stacks up. Now, to your question, I mean, obviously, I would always say efficiency is first and foremost and should be the goal of any operator, whether or not you're a team lead, a service manager, a VP of ops, a COO, or the CEO, wearing all of these hats as a smaller MSP. Efficiency in your business is the name of the game, right? This is how you generate profit, and this is how you make your life a lot easier, because you'll have more cash flow and less stress in your life. That's the whole point of this, right? We want to have an efficient business. So always be operating on looking for inefficiencies and squeezing those out of the business. But like whether or not you have a PM, I think is contingent on exactly this, right? Have you stabilized service, and are you operating projects well? And that usually becomes the first point of probably not having a PM. A lot of people will designate a project manager. Sometimes it's the owner, sometimes it's the service manager. I would sort of suggest the first step that you want to go through in this is having a project coordinator. And I've been really sort of loud about this, that some of the best project coordinators in our industry start out as office managers or procurement people or an admin, right? Because they're systems minded, they're somewhat friendly. These people don't need to be technical. They just need to be able to follow a script and run these things. And that allows sort of the space to open up where you're not sort of borrowing high resource technical talent, expensive talent for these things. You just need an accountability partner for operating those projects. So this helps to kind of open this up and make it a little more practical. Also gives people a career track where if they can start as an office manager, you start giving them sort of 20-30% of their role becomes project coordinator, then maybe they become a full-blown PM in 3 years. Fantastic. Like you've given them a career path. So I think that's the way to think about this. Um, Obviously, the reason you would have dedicated PM resources is you've been able to fill up the funnel and have enough projects to be able to dedicate, 30, 35 hours a week for someone just working on projects. And then you simply scale from there. But you're always sort of suffering from the same problem realistically, right? Because you dedicate a project resource and you need a little more resources than that. So you're still borrowing from the service team, right? So you end up kind of in this same sort of loop of having to sort of leverage resources from the other department, which again sort of gets the whole point I think we're driving towards is the efficiency of that service group and being able to move your labor further up into this service pyramid creates maximum value. So originally, like the way I used to describe this is why I'm such an advocate for outsourced service desk, right? Because you can outsource the problem of hiring great talent to somebody else, let them sort of focus on that. So you're not sort of spending, 4 hours a week, 10 hours a week trying to hire people. Those people are professionally trained to do that job. And then you have an elastic capability to expand or contract the team based on what's happening in your business. But also it gives you the time to be able to focus on hiring people that will be more connected to your clients, right? Maybe you're doing projects, account management, and BD. Those are the parts of the business that are actually high leverage. Service is a commodity, right? And it's not that it's not important. It absolutely is. That's why it's the base of the pyramid. But there's a lot of things that can be done to minimize the complexity and sort of the onerous nature of an hour by hour, minute by minute requirement for what service looks like in an MSP, right?
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And of course, we're super aligned there. Certainly from those incremental gains that add up to become real capacity. Real capacity becomes meaningful work, and then meaningful work at scale becomes higher project fees, better margin, and you're probably a better engaged team as well, right? It's less about this is broken. Here's this escalation. It's more about, how can I deliver value to this customer in a meaningful way.
Yeah,
Um,
it's one of the biggest lies in our industry is like every organization talking to a potential prospect. Like the one thing that say, "Oh, we're very proactive in our work." It's like, well, not really. Like most organizations are not, unfortunately. Like we try, but quite frankly, most organizations are highly reactive, right? Like being able to standardize these things and work proactively on just sort of environment assessments and working on TBRs and stuff. That's the stuff we should be working on. But if you look inside any MSP, on a Monday morning, it's a firefight, and that's the sort of the majority of the work that we do. So it's not inherently true that we're by nature, our business is a proactive management of IT. It's more of an aspirational goal until you get to sort of this escape velocity where you have enough standardization and process and things are kind of dialed in where you can actually start to pivot certain people towards that proactive environment. But again, like this is why we're trying to find these efficiencies. And as you said, working on that higher value work, right? Higher value to yourself as an organization, but certainly higher value work to your clients.
oh yeah, I mean, it's an excellent point about first thing Monday morning, right? You're either chasing tickets or being chased by tickets.
Yep.
The dreaded "where is this" email or any update email,
Yep.
first thing Monday morning.
Yep.
But again, I think that exit velocity point is ultimately what we're building to, right? And that's what we believe. And if you disagree with any of these points, please feel free to challenge me because would love to dig into it. But that's where we believe the first layer of opportunity is for burgeoning AI use cases in the space, right? Is taking small tasks, incremental administrative tasks that ultimately build up a significant percentage of a technician's capacity in a workday, and legislating it or taking it totally off their plate through automation. And so that's where we'll start today, right? I think we'll dig into a little bit about the differences between assistive AI, which you're seeing a lot of platforms start to dip their toe into. We've had it in place for quite a while now, and we're actually expanding, evolving, and starting to explore agentic AI solutions. So quick primer on the difference between the two, and then we can get into like real use cases for both. So I don't know if other folks are big into DC comic books or a throwback to the Terminator back in the 80s, but we felt like this was the right comparative graphic to think between the two categories of AI that are emerging in the space. Complementary being Cyborg from the DC Comics, right? It's a human plus AI to create more capacity, more efficient service delivery. Whereas where we think agentic, we think of it more as supplementary. It's autonomous service delivery or autonomous ticket handling. I know we talked about this and some of the nuances between the two when I made an appearance on your podcast not that long ago. Curious if your thinking about either or both has changed at all since then.
So this was interesting because I saw your guys's webinar kind of introducing this concept, and I liked the way that this was laid out, right? Um, Sort of like this is allowing me to go on a bunch of rants that kind of bother me about the industry. So this is perfect. I thanks for that. I think one of the things that, again, that sort of bothers me about the industry that plays into this is I see so many organizations that are hyper fixated on automation. And they have this idea in their head that if they could just automate the work that comes to them in the service desk, then all of a sudden, their lives would be so much simpler and, 80% of the work would just go away. And that, like, I understand why people think that is, but it's almost never the case, right? Like, organizations that can actually build great automation are usually very big because the level of effort that goes into creating automation that works in the first place is huge. And I think people really underestimate the amount of time, effort, and thought it takes to truly automate things in an MSP environment, let alone an IT environment. So I think like the supplementary piece, I think people misunderstand, right? It's that they think of this as automation, as like AI will just sort of go and fix things in the environment, responding to certain alerts automatically, that sort of stuff, right? And I think like the use case that Thread puts into this, I think is a lot more pragmatic, right? Are there tickets that the bots can solve on behalf of the user's requests? I think that is a way higher leverage and a much more practical use of this. And one of the things like around bots, I also have like a whole episode on just like help bots as well. On this lady that used to work at Amazon, kind of working on their bots, which work very, very well.
Mhm.
Um, and this is a generational shift that will become much more practical as the years go on, right? If you talk to any person sort of our age or younger, kind of in their 40s, 30s, or 20s, their preference is to interface with a bot. Like whenever I go to a website, the first thing is not that I don't look for a phone number first. I look for a bot agent and then, ask for someone to help me there, right? Because like I want to do other things and just sort of type and text when I'm working on this. And for the very like if you have an autonomous ticket killer like the agentic AI that is able to solve some of those issues and then escalate the rest up to a human as it's required, again, like even if you can shave off 10-15% conservatively of those tickets, fantastic, right? Like that's a huge, huge benefit to the service desk because they are tickets that get solved and never required any human intervention. But the client is probably happy with that because they were able to solve that problem within sort of a 3-minute text conversation that doesn't interrupt their work. They don't have to schedule it and wait for someone to call them back, all of that, right? Then, if it actually requires an escalation and goes to a human, that's where the complementary piece, I think that people don't really recognize. And this is one of the things that I'm super, super excited about with Thread is that you're backing that tech with the AI information of all of the other information that it can process within the environment, pulling sort of typical things that happen, maybe something particular about that environment, right? So not only does it pass the information that it potentially got from the client as a part of that text conversation before it escalated to you, but it's also kind of giving you information about things that typically happen in this environment. Right? Like a lot of organizations try to go towards pod environments. And one of the biggest drivers for people wanting to do pods is that they want people to have specialized knowledge about particular clients. Now, if we documented correctly, that's not necessary, but I get sort of this drive towards sort of like really hyper focusing on a few set of clients. If you think about it, like that becomes unnecessary if the bot feeds you all the tribal information that either exists in tickets and has never been documented, or hopefully has been documented, but you don't have to go find it. It just serves it up to you, right? So I think the power of that agentic AI to sort of clear the deck and just sort of work on ticket hygiene at the lowest layer and just sort of serve things up to people as they make requests, but also augmenting the human to make them faster, more efficient, to be able to sort of clear through the things that do require some level of insight, right?
Yeah, and I think you've nailed a couple of things that we think about very deeply, right? I think if you it not too distant history, if you go back to our YouTube and some of our non-Todd Kane content, but I think it was Monthly Magic that Mark and I did towards the end of last year. You can find us actually saying like, don't just open up ChatGPT and put it in front of your team or your users, right? Because I think the important element to what you're getting at is like the experiential side of it, both in terms of the quality of response that it gets back, but also is it actually efficient, or is it just like a call tree presented in a different way, and people are
Exactly.
going to get annoyed that it's just a different bot that they have to interface with. And so what we've really tried to do is both from the tech point of view and also from the user point of view, is think from the experience inward and from the human inward, as opposed to from the service desk and from the PSA out. And so that's why we think we have a unique point of view on what's valuable today and how to start with just the base level, the lowest level of value, and build on it from there on both sides, rather than like, hey, yes, I can think through the most complicated workflow and do like a massive IFTT type automation for this one very specific use case, but is it worth the effort?
Yeah, like maybe a good example that comes to mind for the agentic side, right? Like there's a few organizations that I've seen that have gotten incredibly good at automating the user creation in environments. Like if you've got kind of an Azure AD environment there, everything is sort of pure cloud. You got the PAX8 integration or your disty of choice, and someone can basically request like internally. Usually, the way this works is they get a ticket, they find out, they get some information with the client, and then they basically just go push a button, and it goes and creates everything for that user. It's a great experience. It minimizes the effort for the tech. But the other thing that I see as a use case here is organizations have a really tough time driving people to use forms, right? So like we create these forms for new users and say like, hey, fill out this form. And it's got like 5 radio boxes and a ton of information that needs to be filled out in order to help that tech to create this user, right? If you pair up that agentic AI, that is a single point of entry where it basically automates form collection, right? And I think this is really powerful because we can't necessarily change the user behavior of if we train them to use the chatbot as their primary mode of support. But we tell them, oh, well, if you need to do these things, then go to this website and fill out a form, right? And like at a base layer, maybe you could say, oh, the bot pushes you to that form. Great. Okay, that's a first step. But like imagine the pairing of that capability where the person opens up the chat for support. The bot recognizes that it's a manager, understands who it is, that it has authority, or it can go out and request authority if it needs to, but it can collect inline all of the information that would otherwise be in a form. So this is like a much better user experience because they can just like tell the bot the information that they need, which is effectively filling out a form, but it's interactive. Then that bot goes out and executes the PowerShell scripts and creates that user. No one's interfaced with this. It's validated that this person has the right to create this information, and all of the expertise of creating it correctly is combed through by that active chatbot, and then it just goes out and does it automatically. Like that's fantastic. This would have otherwise been probably 3 to 4 hours of effort just for the tech, and probably an hour or two from the user, right?
Yeah, and I think you're 100% right. And we hear it all the time. If there's a portal or a forum that's hosted somewhere, adoption outside of like the site contact or whomever is responsible for the business relationship and the delivery of the services back to the organization within the organization tends to be the primary person who's interfacing with it, right? But getting the rank and file individual who's just trying to get their job done and may need to add a user to do that, to drop what they're doing, remember a URL, navigate to a portal, log in, and then fill out a form for the 100th time. It doesn't feel like a great experience. And I think what it's still missing is exactly what you were alluding to, which is how do I connect the need of the individual to the service catalog of the MSP? How do those two relate? Do they relate? And how is it updated? And so I think and you nailed it, right? Like the opportunity is dead time. And I think we've been calling it ticket ping pong. I know TimesEst calls it something very similar in terms of the scheduling side of that equation. But we're thinking more so from time to request, or time from the time of request to the time to response to the plan to when it actually gets started working, right? Time to delivery of that service. And often what happens is you send an email or you send a chat or you call on the desk, the request gets lodged, and we know, right, having been on the operations side, that there's all kinds of stuff happening in the back end. But all the user gets is an automated response saying, we've received your request, we'll be back to you. And so where we believe the opportunity is exactly what you alluded to, right? While you're waiting.
I love this idea because I talk about this all the time in making people understand, because techs are terrible about this. You're like, did you get back to the client about this? And their response is usually, well, I don't have an answer yet. It's like, well, that doesn't matter. Like service is communication, right? Like especially people in the tech industry need to understand this, that we're a service organization that just happens to focus on technology. So like the service element of this is massive, because if you think about it, say a person logs a ticket on Tuesday morning, and then a bunch of stuff happens internally in the organization, and then it gets closed at Tuesday afternoon. Then okay, is that within SLA? Was it a great client experience? Maybe, maybe not. The thing that drives users crazy the most, and honestly, this goes back to efficiency. One of the reasons users call the support desk is they think that there's a higher level of accountability when they speak to someone, rather than just firing a ticket in and it goes into a black hole. And then someone may respond to them later and say fixed, and then like, okay, hopefully it was fixed. Whereas like the alternative that you should focus on is acknowledging that ticket, not the autoresponder, but a person actually acknowledging, hey, we've got your ticket, I'm assigning it in the queue, you can expect someone to call you within the next 2 hours. And then if, say you get busy, you're working on some higher priority items, then someone should reach out to them and say, hey, so sorry, we won't get to it at this time, we'll get back to you after lunch, is that okay? And most people would be like, not awesome, but okay, whatever, right? And then, hey, we think we know what the problem is here, we'll call you back at the end of the day and confirm that it's been fixed. And they're like, okay, fine, all right, sounds good. So the difference between I logged a ticket in the morning and I have no idea all day whether or not somebody gives a shit about this ticket or not, versus at the end of the day where it gets closed, or the alternative being sort of like updates being provided to that user throughout the course of that interaction. So you're setting and resetting expectations with the end user. And so my point is I think like that's why I love this chart, is we know that stuff is going on, and like that can't be the justification of like, well, the user should know those things. They don't, right? So if you can have some tether, some connection to them to keep them informed about what's going on. Like one of my favorite sort of like and Matt, we've talked about this before, but my favorite entry to chat originally was with Desk Director.
Yep.
Because they had this, like you could open up and look for the tickets that you have in their portal, and it would give you this little racetrack of what has happened with the ticket. And that was incredibly meaningful for people, not because like for a bunch of different reasons. The fact that the person could go in and look at their ticket and understand if it's being updated and when things have happened is informative, right? Plus it gives you sort of the state of expectations. So I think like these are the reasons why chat is way more efficient than phones. So back to this efficiency thing of like, if you can drive people to chat, like a tech can reasonably support 2 to 3 chats at a time. They can only be on one phone call, right? So you want to get people off the phone and utilizing chat, but a lot of people are nervous that creates a lower quality experience for the user, which is not the case if you look at it in this context. In a lot of ways, that email and that phone call are creating a negative perception of the support experience, right?
Yeah. If we go back a couple, perception of nothing happening. And I think, on the last webinar that we did, you mentioned something very similar, which is frequency of communication relative to the SLA that's set for that priority of request, that urgency of request, that impact of request. Having a point of view on how frequently do we update the user in order to not only maximize the efficiency, but also the experience. And so when you mentioned the Desk Director progressive bar, I immediately think we also have a similar feature in our Messenger product that we liken to the Domino's pizza tracker. I don't know if you're
Right.
a pizza guy.
Yep.
I'm a huge pizza guy. The last thing I want to do is after I fire in an order, be sitting there and be like, I wonder when it's going to get here, right? And so it's great to be able to see like, oh, now it's made, it's in the oven, now it's on the way.
So it's interesting you bring up that point. Like I like specifically calling out Domino's in the tracker because if anyone wants to do a fun little research project, go look at Domino's stock price over the last like 10 and 20 years. It is staggering. Like almost like basically sort of a tech style growth of like whatever it is, like 300%. It is
Wow.
wild, right? Because they really maximized on technology and that communication of delivery because like they were in the tank for a long time. And if you think about sort of the value that is created out of simply communicating how this is going to happen and focusing on fast delivery with high levels of communication, that like absolutely skyrocketed their stock price for a focus on that. So I think it's really emblematic of exactly what we're talking about. This is highly valued and creates massive value for your clients, right?
Yeah. And our big belief is it much like Domino's, it differentiates you from the competition. If you
Yep.
take that incredibly customer centric, user centric point of view and think back to the business as opposed to from the desk out, it'll pay dividends. You'll start to see it in RFPs. We believe. Like, do you
So
support that?
So I love this idea. Just occurred to me, but I don't know if Matt, if you've seen people to leverage this and experiment with this. But if you're in a prospect meeting, open up your chat bot, your chat agent with Thread, and like give them demonstrate to them the experience of how different it is to interact with their the chat engine of like okay, hang on, let me show you how this works, and you just like randomly open up a ticket. Maybe tell the service desks that you're out doing this. Hopefully you don't have to,
Yeah.
but maybe just if you're not confident about it, give them a heads up. And then like walk through this experience of like, let me show you how support works in our organization. I'm going to open up this chat request and we'll see what happens, right? You can kind of walk them through this and literally use your service experience and the differentiation of utilizing Thread and the messenger box to do this. I think is a really powerful way to demonstrate to people how differentiated you are, right? Like you don't need to call us, you don't need to send us an email. You can just interact with us right here in your team's environment, right?
Yeah, it puts me in mind. I don't know if you're a fan of the U.S. Office show, but it puts me in mind of a scene where they call into a big box competitor of theirs, and they're sat on hold the whole time they're doing a pitch, and then they pick up the phone, call somebody on their sales team, gets picked up right away, and it's a much streamlined, more I would say again a more user centric experience,
Yeah.
which ends up winning them the deal. But yeah, we do have partners who they dedicate. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear my dog in the background, but we who dedicate pages on their website to just that, to what their response time is, and also reviews from their customers saying, whether it be from SmileDeck or whichever CSAT platform that you're using, streaming responses in real time. So they're actually presenting the CSAT survey in chat, and because it's meeting the user wherever they are, they get a much higher response rate, and on the whole, much higher scores as well.